For joining us today for this new information, which is a webinar in our series on new directions in conservation psychology. We're really excited to have this topic, and I'm eager to learn what Louise has to say about this. So the title is Social Marketing and Social Movement Strategies, Making Connections. One of the strongest branches of conservation psychology is community-based social marketing, which applies research in social psychology to promote sustainable behaviors at the individual and community level. In this webinar, Louise will provide a brief introduction to CBSM, the little letters that stand for community-based social marketing. We'll be using that term a lot, but argues that the present scale of environmental problems requires social movement organizing in addition to individual and small group change. Using examples, she'll suggest how techniques in social marketing can serve social movement goals and how social movement thinking invites a reconceptualization of social marketing for environmental behavior change. So I'm Joy Ackerman, and I'll be doing the overview and introductions today. The presentation will be by Dr. Louise Chawla, and after the presentation, Dr. Chawla and I and Abby Abhrush will be available to work with your questions and comments. Dr. Louise Chawla is a professor emerita in the program in environmental design at the University of Colorado Boulder. She's an environmental psychologist and dedicated to public participation in urban design and planning. She's active in community engagement, design, and research center that she helped to establish in her program. Louise has been involved in conservation psychology since the field was defined, and she's taught in several conservation psychology institutes organized by Antioch, New England. My interests are just as a faculty member here at Antioch, New England. I teach a course in conservation psychology, and with Abby serve as co-director of our Conservation Psychology Center. I'll say a little bit more about Abby's qualifications later, but first I want to make sure that everybody's on board with us. You should be connected via audio broadcast when you enter the webinar. We're going to record the presentation and post it to our Antioch website, so you'll get a link to that if you're a registered participant or if you registered and couldn't participate today. And so if you don't want to take notes as we go along, you can be assured that the video of the presentation will be available to you, including the slides. If you have any questions for the presenter as we go along or at the end, there's a Q&A, question and answer section that you have access to. And we ask that you use the Q&A section to post your comments. I'll be able to see them there as they come in, and will moderate the presenter and staff response to those questions. If you're having any trouble with any aspect of the broadcast, and if you've been listening in, you know that we have some trouble too, you can use the chat section to message Terry, who is our host today, and she'll help you out. So I'll just go to our next slide, which is a brief commercial advertisement for the next webinar in the series. This will happen in February. And say a little bit more about the presenter. Abby Abhrush Walton is the co-director both of the Center for Conservation Psychology and our Center for Climate Preparedness and Community Resilience. She's on the faculty of Antioch, New England's Environmental Studies Department, and under her leadership, she's also advanced sustainability and sustainability outcomes measurement on campus. In her webinar, she's going to be talking about facilitating pro-environmental behavior and overviewing the research. So if you're interested in this, put it on your calendar, and when the link comes up, we hope you'll register for it and join us again in February. Now on to today's program. I think, Louise, this is your cue to share your screen.
Yes, and I am trying to pull it up. So we may need to go back to our fallback with you, Joy, because now when I click, it says this will stop other screen sharing. Do you want to continue?
That's okay. Yeah, it should stop my screen sharing.
Okay. All right. Then let me get
Be
on
bold.
to mode. Oh, wait. Sorry. Okay. All right. So all of you who've registered for this today, I really appreciate your interest and wanting to travel with me for this half hour or so, following ideas that I've been reflecting on and mulling over for a while. So my own research and professional activities focus on developing active care for the natural world in childhood and youth, and how that forms a foundation for lifespan responsible environmental behaviors. That means that the activities, that the behaviors that I want to foster in my work involve the creation of opportunities to connect children and teens to the natural world. In thinking about this and working on this, I found strategies of community-based social marketing very useful. So I will give a brief introduction to community-based social marketing and some of its tools. Then I will talk about possibilities for connecting it to social movement thinking and give examples of how this can be done. I'll be drawing on the work of Dr. Abigail Abhrush Walton, whom Joy just introduced to you, and she will join a section of this webinar. And then I will also draw on the work of a former doctoral student whom I advised, Chiara D'Amore. So community-based social marketing is a branch of the larger field of social marketing, which began to be defined in the 1970s. It applies principles from social psychology and other disciplines to encourage positive social change. Community-based social marketing encourages sustainable environmental behaviors in particular. As a systematic set of practices, it was developed by Doug Mackenzie Moore of Canada, but many other social researchers have added to it. And what you see on the screen is the third edition of Doug Mackenzie Moore's really guide to how to follow community-based social marketing strategies. The whole book is available for free on his website that you see there on the book cover. I'll also be drawing on the work of Wesley Schultz, who you see on the second book cover, and Nancy Lee and Philip Kotler are some of the leading thinkers and authors in the field of social marketing at large. So social marketing, community-based social marketing are really parts of one large field, but with a focus on environmental behavior in community-based social marketing. Wes Schultz wrote a very helpful review of community-based social marketing that identified 10 strategies that research has shown to be effective in encouraging people to adopt sustainable behaviors. And he just discussed which are the most useful under different conditions. I'm going to begin by describing a few of these strategies, and then after that, I'll give you examples of how they can be applied in the context of social movement organizing. So the first step is to select a behavior that you're going to focus on that has a significant impact on the environment, and a target group you're going to work with that appears open to change, whose behaviors will make a difference for the environment. You are going to be spending a lot of time, energy, and very likely money too to promote behavior change. So it's really important to be strategic about the behavior you choose to focus on. The second step is with a group that you've decided to work with, where you think you can feasibly, it's practical to get them to change a behavior, and when they do so, it will have a significant benefit for the environment. The first thing you need to do is, with this group, analyze the barriers that make it difficult for them to adopt the behavior you are focused on, and consider how can you lower these barriers. And then you also need to understand, if this group did adopt this behavior, what would the benefits be for them? So you can make those benefits salient and accessible to this group. That means having conversations with people in this group, maybe focus groups, surveys, diving into the literature about this group to understand them better. Whatever method of social research it takes to figure out the barriers and the benefits from their perspective. The third step is choosing strategies that are most likely to influence this group within the context of their situation. So I'm going to just go through some of the main strategies that you'll see in the examples that I will give later. They're defined here, so I'm just going to go through them quickly and you can read the screen. So getting people to make a commitment to the behavior. That research shows they're more likely to follow through in that case. Incentives, of course. If people believe they will gain benefits that are meaningful to them, if they engage in this behavior, they're more likely to do so. Effective communication, including education. You need to let people know why this is behavior, again, in terms that from their perspective matter to them. Feedback. If people see positive effects from their action, they're more likely to continue it. And we know, again, from considerable research that feedback works best when people get that information immediately or shortly afterwards, so they can make that connection between what they did and the positive effect that they're seeing. Social modeling, we are social animals. So social modeling and social norms are both huge. We know, again, that people are most likely to imitate a behavior if they see people whom they admire, whom they aspire to be like, or people who are like themselves right now performing this behavior. And social modeling is also a way of communicating social norms. It shows that people in my social group consider this behavior the normal and expected thing to do, or they consider it the preferred behavior that you should do. So we describe that first as the descriptive norm and the second as the prescriptive norm. And both kinds of norms, what we do and what we believe we should do, are influential. Again, we're social animals and we want to be like others in our social group. So using these and other strategies, community-based social marketing has focused on influencing the behavior of individuals and small groups, like people in a workplace, people in a neighborhood, to primarily reduce water use, pollution emissions, energy use, to recycle, to avoid polluting, to protect wildlife habitat. These are the behaviors that community-based social marketing has focused on. And if you go back to that book about protecting the environment, what works, you'll see many great case studies, short and long, of showing how community-based social marketing has been applied with all of these goals. The incentives that it has primarily used have been economic gain. People save money on their water bills, their energy bills, they get rebates, or that comfortable feeling that we are acting like others in our social reference group. We are conforming with social norms. However, we are faced with global environmental change now on a daunting scale. We had the latest report just came out again warning us that yes, we really need to act now and act fast with dramatic changes to avoid the worst effects of global climate change. And here you see right here in my own neighborhood, the retreat of the Boulder Glacier. The flooding there is the flooding we all went through here in 2013. This picture of wildfires certainly takes us back to California and the Northwest, and of course, more extreme heat and drought. And in response to this, Naomi Klein recently published the book, This Changes Everything, about society's need to respond to global climate change with social movements and nothing less than that scale. She acknowledges the value of strategies like community-based social marketing to change behaviors of individuals and small groups, but she argues that this is not enough by itself. It's good, but by itself, it's not enough. We need to learn how to mount effective social movements, she claims, for deep changes in people's sense of their relationship with the earth and the economic and political frameworks in which we live. I agree with Naomi Klein, and for me, this puts a new question at the center of conservation psychology. What we've been doing is all well and good, but I think we also need to think about how can we link to social movement thinking and to increase the impacts of community-based social marketing. So that puts the question at the center: what can conservation psychology learn from the study of social movements, and what can it contribute? And we have, paradoxically, quite a bit of thinking about this in the larger literature on social marketing. There is a strand of discussion, and it's been continuing for quite a number of years now, thinking about how can social marketing techniques be applied in social movement thinking and strategizing. And I'm not sure why, but I can't find any discussion about that in the literature on community-based social marketing. I've asked people who work very centrally in that field, and they don't know why either. But I think we need to start doing this. We need to start making these connections in our work. So Alan Andreessen, who is one of the leaders in the field of social marketing research, wrote the book Social Marketing in the 21st Century, and it is on this topic. He argues that one of the things we can do is apply the strategies of social marketing to influence key individuals who have the power to change the structures in which we all live and work, who can initiate significant political, social, economic, and environmental change. So he asks us to consider these questions. Just as we have to think about always what is the key group we want to reach, he says, well, who are the key individuals, the key agents, the key change makers that can change things structurally on a larger scale that we want to persuade to adopt more responsible environmental behaviors? And then how can we apply the strategies of social marketing to influence these pivotal people? So at this point, I'm going to welcome Abhrush Walton into the webinar, because Abby has done research on encouraging directors of large investment funds to divest from oil, gas, and mining corporations. Abby has a long history of activism to change mining, oil, and gas extraction practices globally. And I think that led you to this question, Abby, of who are the key people you could get to make these big changes happen. So could you tell us a bit about what you did and where you applied some of those strategies of social marketing that I just listed?
Yeah, thank you, Louise. And thanks for inviting me into this webinar. This is a fantastic topic to be focused on. And the key questions that you've presented here based on Andreasen's work are really interesting for us to consider. But I want to go back to a point that you made early in this broadcast, which is the recognition about how important it is to be strategic when you're engaging in social marketing, how important it is to be strategic about which behavior you choose to focus on, recognizing that you're going to put a lot of energy and resources into facilitating a behavior change. So if you're going to look for significant outcomes, why not pick a behavior that is a real lever in terms of creating the outcomes that you want to achieve? And in terms of my own work and thinking about these questions, over the course of the decades that I've been focused on oil and gas extraction issues, hard rock mining issues, and the impacts on ecosystems, but also mostly indigenous communities, frontline communities that are affected by the refining process. And then for all of us who are affected by the combustion of fossil fuels in terms of its being the primary contributor to climate change. When I was thinking about my research focus, I thought, well, what kind of behaviors are most strategic in terms of shifting the dynamics of fossil fuel combustion? And the reality is that we live within systems, we live within public policy systems that shape our behavioral choices. We live in economic systems that shape our behavioral choices. And we happen to live in a capitalist economy system in which the movement of financial resources and the way that those resources are invested act, in essence, as a type of voting behavior. And so where I chose to focus my own research, coming back to the question that you have here about the key agents who can initiate change on a large scale, and in what forms, I came back to looking at fossil fuel divestment as a specific behavior change that could be that lever that would help to shift social norms about investing, take a new approach that suggests that it's no longer acceptable or normal to put our financial resources into an activity, namely fossil fuel extraction and combustion, that we know is harming our own chances as a species for survival and impacting so many other aspects of the earth. And I was really interested in who were those key agents who could initiate change on a large scale. Now, there is an emerging fossil fuel divestment social movement that emerged in 2011, and in a relatively short period of time has gained quite a lot of traction in terms of bringing both organizations, institutions, and individuals on board in terms of making a public commitment, back to one of those key points within community-based social marketing, a public commitment to divest all of their financial resources from fossil fuel investments. And that, to me, is an intriguing and very hopeful focus of inquiry. And so I did spend time focusing on one aspect of this movement. I looked at US-based foundations who have emerged as leaders in the fossil fuel divestment movement. And I conducted a study looking at what explained their readiness to engage in this highly unconventional investing behavior change. And I'll be talking about the findings from that research in the February webinar that's part of this series. But what I've learned through this process is that there are a lot of aspects of social marketing that are relevant to understanding the power of social movements. So beginning with that public commitment statement, the social modeling piece of people in society who others look up to or view as thought leaders. And I'll make the point with the fossil fuel divestment movement that apart from the philanthropy leaders who have come out in support of divestment, including the Rockefeller Foundation, there are many other important institutions and leaders throughout the world who have gotten on board with this, Pope Francis being one. So if you go back and read his encyclical from 2 springs ago, he actually calls for divestment from fossil fuels and highlights the need for the emergence of leaders who are capable of shifting our investing practices out of fossil fuels. President Obama, of course, in his very first major address on climate change, called for divestment. And just recently, last month, the European Parliament adopted a resolution encouraging all pension funds to divest pension funds from investments in fossil fuels. So it's a growing movement. At this point, $5.5 trillion within a global stock market system with assets of about $69 trillion have been pledged or actually divested from fossil fuels. And so when we look at that question of where there's some significant levers for change at a major level, that's one that comes to mind. In terms of another specific social movement that is interesting to look at, the Citizens Climate Lobby social movement, which has emerged in the United States, looks not at private financial investments, but looks instead at public policy. And in the absence of the U.S. Congressional leaders' ability to make significant progress on climate change, CCL has emerged as a broad-based social movement in this country, engaging people in a process of advocacy focused on their elected representatives at the federal level and calling on them to adopt a carbon fee and dividend policy for this country that would significantly change the dynamics of carbon emissions for the United States. And so, just in terms of thinking about scale, in terms of thinking about key agents, I always come back to who are the public policy decision makers and who are the corporate decision makers who can really help us to pull a lever that's significant in terms of making change.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Abby. And it's very consistent with Alan Andreessen's, excuse me, with his argument, which is that, again, taking time to figure out who the behavior you want to impact, who are those different key people. And I think as you're suggesting, it's never going to be one single person. It's going to be, there are a whole line of decision makers that control that larger structure within which we act, and thinking about that whole array of them. And Andreessen kind of takes us through some examples of doing that and then determining the ones that we want to focus on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to make one final point, which is that I also want to encourage people, though, not to forget that we have our own spheres of influence. And of course, a lot of the research and action is focused on our individual household level behavior. But the reality is that we have significant spheres of influence that we're part of, whether it's through our professional associations or the organizations in which we work or recreate or pray, all of these, or learn, all of these different spheres of influence that we have. And those are also effective venues for our own ability to be key agents of change.
And what you're describing there also is, excuse me, is changing social norms.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And being change agents in the spheres of influence in the places where we have the ability to do that and to model new behaviors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to show another way of putting social movement thinking and activism and community-based social marketing together. Andreessen in his work describes what would be often just considered traditional social movement activism. It's trying to change policies, large structures economically and politically. But there's also thinking called new social movement theory. And it asks the question of how do we change people's values and lifestyles in their everyday lives? And that's what this second example focuses on. I don't know how many of you here listening are familiar with the book Last Child in the Woods by the journalist Richard Louv. But Louv really articulated what a good deal of research shows has been within 1 or 2 generations in the way children grow up, from being free-ranging kids who could explore their neighborhoods and in the process find areas of nature in their neighborhoods, even in many urban areas, and have those encounters, those spontaneous encounters through play and exploration in nature, and now being much more supervised, indoors much more, not having that freedom to explore the environment as previous generations did. So this book, Last Child in the Woods, touched a nerve, and as a consequence, Richard Louv and others he gathered around him created a Children in Nature's network. And one of its program areas is called Natural Families, and it encourages people to organize family nature clubs in their communities. And here you see an example of one. So I'm going to show you this is the work of Chiara D'Amore, a PhD now, former doctoral student whom I advised, where she evaluated 47 family nature clubs, primarily in the United States and Canada. And she also created one to do very close ethnographic work using multiple methods to understand how the club functioned. Chiara also happened to have, and still does, works in the area of energy conservation, which has been very much influenced by community-based social marketing. And therefore, she applied a number of techniques of community-based social marketing. So I'm going to show how these kinds of thinking can go together. So in social movement theory, people looking at how social movement works, many of them have a social movement organization, or they may be a number of social movement organizations working with a common goal, trying to shift society and toward the direction of greater, well, it can work both ways, but let's hope working to shift society in the area of greater social justice and environmental protection and toward good ends. It will be linked with, we'll have a number of programs or campaigns or initiatives. And then each campaign or initiative has to come kind of down on the ground into people's homes, into their workplaces, to people on the street, as we say, and reach people where they are. We call this, it's face-to-face action groups that really get down to the level of ordinary people in their everyday lives. And each face-to-face action group typically will have a social, an organizer or a movement organizer, or maybe more than one. When the Children in Nature Network was formed by Richard Louv and colleagues, they very deliberately followed this model and designed Children in Nature Network to be a social movement organization. You can see here its different current program areas. And under that one program, Natural Families, you have the family nature clubs, where someone like Kiara, their club leaders, are the social organizers. So the organizers of the clubs, and this is true in larger social movement thinking, they have a very clear idea of what the movement is and what it is about. In new social movement thinking, it's the people live in their workplaces or their homes or their neighborhoods may not have any consciousness that they're part of a movement, but they are attracted to these changes in lifestyle, changes in value that are consistent with movement goals. So I'm just quickly going to go through here how some of the strategies of community-based social marketing were applied by Kiara. Again, she thought very strategically about who she wanted to focus on. There is quite a large body of research called significant life experience research that shows that people who take active care of the natural world across their lifespan have had these experiences early in their lives. Regular time in nature for free play and exploration in childhood and their adolescent years, role models of appreciation and care for nature, and opportunities to learn how to actively care for nature. This is a club outing right here. The club every once in a while does a service day, a stewardship day. So Kiara deliberately integrated all three of these experiences into her club. Every club, nature club, however, involves regular time in nature for free play and exploration, and the role models of appreciation and care, who are club leaders but also become the parents themselves, which is very powerful for children. Lowering barriers to the desired behavior. One was simply, it's very hard to get a whole family packed together and at a location at the appointed time every second Sunday afternoon, which is the case in Kiara's club. So Kiara did everything to make that as convenient as possible. Regularly scheduled outings every second Sunday afternoon, sending parents tips in advance of how to be prepared, where they're going, what to expect, how to be prepared. And also, she knew from interviews and surveys in her research that a major barrier for parents taking their kids outside or letting their kids play in nature was the fear of risk, that their kid could get hurt, and they themselves don't know what to do outdoors in nature and would not feel adequate to protect their children. And that's a very large barrier. And we know that actually from a number of studies. But the clubs address that and lower that barrier because people know they're in a group, they're in good hands, in the hands of the club leader, and there are other people there who can rise to any occasion, no matter what happens. People had to make an oral commitment, a written commitment to, in this case, a written commitment to Kiara. They registered for the club, and then before each outing, they let her know and said, yes, we plan to be there. So they made a commitment. What Kiara found from her research is what motivated people to want to join a club was they wanted to learn about places to take their children in nature and to have fun, to have quality family time, to be active, and to support their child's health and well-being. So Kiara made these benefits as salient as possible. After each outing, she posts pictures that illustrate families, having all of these benefits, post them on the club website and Facebook page, and also post information research that demonstrates that, in fact, being out in nature does have these positive impacts for families and children and for all ages. Kiara and her husband Jeremy, and their 2 young children are similar to the families that they attract, and they model desired behaviors. In this case, they're all making seed bombs of wildflower seeds that they're going to throw in a restoration area. Modeling that it's okay to let your child explore freely and in the natural world, that if any issue arises, this is how you address it. This is how you act conservingly and respectfully in natural areas. And then in return, the parents can see those behaviors and they begin to model them for each other and for their children. And this establishes, again, the expected social norm. And Chara in her interviews got many quotations like this of parents saying, oh, they didn't know it was okay for their kids to get in water, to get dirty, to play in the mud. They didn't know that that was okay. So as one mother said, it has broadened my definition of what is acceptable or appropriate. So their social norms are changing as they look around and see, oh, other families like myself, other parents are letting their kids do this. It's okay. Feedback. Community-based social marketing is primarily focused on, as I said, financial gains or convenience. But in this case, and this is what New Social Movement thinking asks us, how it asks us to reconceptualize movement thinking. There are intrinsic benefits. Their outings in nature with their children has immediate intrinsic benefits, like the child's joy. This is this little girl's first day in wild water, and you can imagine if you're her parent how you respond to a face like that, a smile like that. Parents could see their kids were much more competent out there in nature than they had imagined. They had a good sense of what they could safely do. And so realizing, that my kid can do a lot of stuff that I didn't know guys his age could do. So you don't have to worry so much. And parents had that feedback right away. And they had their own developing sense of competence, that they were learning how to be comfortable outdoors in the natural world with their children. So again, that's immediate feedback within themselves as well. As one mother said, you are moving the map of your own self at the same time as you're moving on the map. And we know from a lot of research that the experiencing competence is a very strong intrinsic motivator in itself. And I'm almost done here. 2 benefits that parents hadn't expected, wasn't on their list of why they joined up with the club, but Kiara did interviews with parents after they'd gone on 6 outings, and already within just 6 outings, parents talked repeatedly, and this is a majority of parents, of a sense of community they experienced and how valuable that was. Like here, they're all planting a monarch butterfly way station. This is in a public park. But then parents formed groups and went and helped each other in their own backyards or around their homes plant butterfly gardens, and the sense of a real community began to develop. And a sense of connection with nature. It wasn't why parents signed up initially, but 97% of parents in post-surveys said that they experienced this sense of connection with nature, which again was a strong intrinsic motivator for them. So there are references here, and you will get the slides, and so you can follow up in more depth with Abhrush Walton's work. And Kiara and I have a paper coming out in the journal's Ecopsychology this December, where you can follow in more detail what I've described here. And I encourage all of you, if you are using community-based social marketing, to think about, who are some of those key people, and how can you use strategies of social marketing within larger frameworks of social movement organizing. And for everyone on the social movement side, I urge you to take a close look at community-based social marketing and the strategies that it uses, because I think putting the two together, social movement thinking and the community-based social marketing strategies, make a really strong combination, and it's work we need to do going forward.
Really fascinating. So now we'll have some time to follow up with questions for Louise. I don't know that I have a set of following on slides, Terry. I'll just put up Louise's face with our topic for today. So we have one question. Louise, can you hear me okay?
I do hear you fine. And the follow-on slides were ways to connect with community-based social marketing organizations if people want to get into more depth. And those can be made available when the program is all available a week from now.
Yes, so I'll just thank you for reminding me of that. Kelly Dennings, one of our collaborators, has shared some information about the Social Marketing Network of Association of North America. What we've decided to do is to put a list of links and resources on the email we send out to registrants, notifying them that the video of this webinar is available on our website. That way they won't have to comb through the slides to get to those links and things.
Good.
So it looks as though we have a couple of questions in the Q&A box, and excuse me, I'm sharing my screen, I guess, and so you'll be able to see these. And what I'll do is read out the question, and then if Louise or Abby would like to address that, you can let me know. I'm just going to change my video so I can see if Abby, if you have your video on, then I can see when you raise your hand. So let's see. Karen Goldberg asks, what strategies can you provide for how to best reach low-income communities or communities of color that have traditionally been disproportionately estranged from the natural environment?
Right.
From my experience, salient connections between benefits and incentives associated with spending time in nature are not equally understood or prioritized across diverse communities.
Right, that's an excellent question. In the slides from Kiara's Family Nature Club, you saw some diversity. Kiara's been thinking about this very hard. She's actually part of a group of trying to enlarge our consciousness, those who have white privilege, to understand challenges and barriers that people with less privilege face. She feels that starting out by working on herself, she and her husband Jeremy, to just be a lot more aware of where we're privileged and where others are less privileged, that's been a necessary groundwork. And as she's done that, she's made connections with diverse groups, their organizations or churches, wherever the group may be. And so again, it's critical to understand the world from other people's perspective, and we need to invest time in doing that, to understand, well, then what are the benefits that are important to these families? I know many cases you're talking about families working 2 or 3 jobs. therefore, again, we get back to larger social movement thinking. This is also a very big question for the Children in Nature Network. I can go back to, if you think of that slide where I put up Children in Nature Network as a social movement organization, and it has multiple programs under it. And some of those programs are directly targeted to cultivating leaders within low-income communities, and natural leaders includes that. So they are the role models. They understand how their community works, and they understand how to talk to people in their community and helping them step into leadership positions. And then the other piece is families are, I mean, even with the middle-class families that Kiara was working with, as I said, their lives are very scheduled. There's a lot of stress being, raising young kids, and it's hard to get everybody together at one place at a certain time. And so the other option is, let's bring nature where people are. So, one approach isn't going to work with everybody, and therefore, again, it's part of community-based social marketing thinking, and it's also part of social movement thinking of how do you get down, working with understanding things from the perspective of the people you're trying to reach, and what will be the best approach for them. You have to learn that from them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Louise. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think one of the key factors about this approach is to really know your audience, to be specific about who they are, but then also to find ways to connect with them and really do that upfront work.
Right.
I notice in my class, a lot of times my students assume they know, one, what the behavior is, and often it's really a collection of different behaviors, and they make assumptions about what the motivations are without really taking the time to dig in and say. So I think we're going to focus a little bit more on that in class this year.
Yes. Let me just say, so another program is Green Schoolyards, and Children in Nature Network is focusing on greening schoolyards in low-income school districts, so that you bring nature where children are.
Great examples. So, and we'll try to include links to some of these programs and websites in the resources that we send out as well. Liz Foote is a student here, and she's asking what you feel are the key needs of the field of social marketing right now. What needs to happen for it to become more widely adopted and supported, particularly in terms of training for graduate students, as well as support and buy-in at the municipality and NGO level. And I know, Louise, that you do some work in the community there in Boulder, and so you or Abby may have some thoughts about that.
Right. Yeah, and let me just say that something briefly, and then Abby, I'm sure you would have a response to this too. Alan Andresen has discussed this point at great length. So if that's your question, how do we get people to be aware of social marketing strategies? I think many people think it's the public service sign in the bus or the subway system, and it is that, but it is a lot more than that. That becomes your behavior change question. So yes, who are the key people? And I think training points us immediately in the direction of some of the key people we need to reach, who are the key people we need to reach so that they are aware of how useful social marketing strategies can be, and they are trained in it, and that's a whole great behavior change question in itself, which would need to be addressed through the steps that I just outlined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. We did have a previous question. I kind of answered it in text, but I want to bring it up, and that's that there was some confusion about whether community-based social marketing arose within conservation psychology, but no, community-based social marketing is a broader field that's been applied to many other kinds of behaviors. And so you, Wes Schultz, others have said, let's look at this strategy for behavior change and see how it might apply to environmental conservation or sustainability behaviors.
Right, right.
So here's an interesting question. It sort of gets at once you have people connected to nature, how do you work with them to help them to become advocates for the environment or engage in pro-environmental behavior? So I realized that Chiara's research was focused on establishing these experiences in childhood. And Abby's research was focused on a particular single behavior of divestment. But is there research showing that these have spillover?
Spillover. Well, there's those three key elements of experiences in childhood and youth that are associated with lifelong active care for nature. There's a lot of research on those. We're beginning to get some longitudinal studies too that are also pointing in this direction. But it does appear that although playing in nature as a child, having people who demonstrate appreciation for nature as key childhood role models, those will give people positive environmental values and attitudes. To translate into action, people need to learn how to act. And that's that third piece of what we need to do is create those opportunities for people to have experiences of working collectively, because it's really, in most cases, we always end up working collectively to really address environmental problems and solutions. People need opportunities to do that. Develop that sense of efficacy that I can do something that has a positive effect on the environment.
All right, I want to just maybe bring up one more question. We're getting tight on time, but I will we'll make note of all the questions here and contact people or find a way to communicate the answers. So somebody asked that they're planning a nature play area at their botanic garden, and they want to promote conservation. Is it enough to provide a place for free play and exploration? How important is adult mentoring by trained staff and volunteers?
Really, all three of those elements that significant life experience research indicates are important should be combined, but giving kids a lot of time for just that spontaneous play in nature, that really is number one. The fact they've created the nature play area already shows the kids, and they're letting the kids play there, already shows the kids that nature's a good thing. But finding ways to just work in demonstrating the importance of being caring. It doesn't mean kids can't, break branches to make forts or things like that. But there are many ways to show which plants are okay and will grow back that way, where you need to respect a plant and let that one alone. How to do planting, that's a really powerful experience for kids. And do planting that's going to attract butterflies or wildlife, showing the importance. These are birds that come to these trees. Let's plant more of these trees. Those kinds of experiences are important too.
Great, thank you. So there's some really great questions here. As I said, we'll take note of them. We're always thinking about topics for future webinars. I know that we'll have more on community-based social marketing coming up in the spring series, and we'll also share these questions with Louise and with Abby and send some resources out to people with our follow-up email from this webinar. But we're getting on to 1 o'clock, so I want to respect your time, Louise, and everybody's time. Thank you for being with us today. Don't forget that we have a next webinar coming up in February. We hope that you'll join us then. And if you have any additional questions for us, please feel free to send them through Terry at the link on the follow-up email. Thank you so much, Louise. It's always great to work with you.
My pleasure.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.